The sun was setting on a quiet suburban neighborhood. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the air carried a gentle breeze that rustled through the trees. It was the kind of evening where everything felt calm and peaceful, until laughter started spilling out of one particular house. Balloons were tied to the mailbox and colorful streamers hung from the porch railing. Inside, a birthday party was in full swing. This wasn't just any birthday party. It was for an 8-year-old girl named Mia. She had big, curious eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. Her grandmother, Laura, was hosting the celebration. Laura wasn't your average grandma, though. She worked as an FBI agent, spending most of her days solving cases and keeping people safe. But today, she wasn't thinking about criminals or investigations. Today, she was focused on making sure Mia had the best day ever. Mia's friends ran around the backyard like little tornadoes, chasing each other with water guns and screaming with delight. They jumped through sprinklers and tried to pop bubbles, floating in the air. The adults sat at picnic tables under twinkling string lights, chatting over plates of barbecue and slices of cake. Someone brought a guitar and started strumming soft tunes, adding to the warm, cozy vibe. It seemed like the perfect evening, but perfection rarely lasts long in neighborhoods like this. As the kids laughed and played, a faint ringing sound came from inside the house. Laura excused herself from the group and stepped into the kitchen to answer the phone. Her brow furrowed as she listened to the voice on the other end. It was a neighbor, a man who lived just a few houses down. His tone was sharp, almost angry. "You need to keep it down," he said firmly. "It's getting late and some of us have work tomorrow." Laura sighed. She understood that not everyone enjoyed loud parties, but it wasn't even 8 p.m. yet. Plus, they'd been careful to keep the music low and avoid anything too disruptive. Still, she didn't want to cause trouble. "I'm sorry if we're disturbing you," she replied politely. "We'll try to keep things quieter." Before she could say anything else, the line went dead. Laura stood there for a moment, staring at the phone. Something about the call didn't sit right with her. Sure, neighbors complained sometimes, that was normal. But this felt different. There was an edge to his voice, a tension that made her uneasy. Shaking off the feeling, she returned to the backyard and asked the kids to move their games indoors. If it meant avoiding further complaints, it was worth it. As the children dashed inside, giggling and dripping wet from the sprinklers, Laura glanced toward the fence separating her yard from the neighbor's property. She noticed movement behind their curtains. Someone was watching, not casually glancing either. It was deliberate, like they were studying every move happening at the party. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just about noise anymore. Something bigger was going on, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her family might be caught in the middle of it. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of what would become a bizarre and unforgettable night. Inside the house, the party continued, though it had shifted to a quieter pace. The kids were now gathered in the living room, playing board games and building forts out of blankets and chairs. Laughter still echoed through the halls, but it was softer now, less chaotic. Laura moved between the guests, making sure everyone felt comfortable. She refilled drinks, handed out snacks, and even joined in a round of charades when one of the kids begged her to play. For a brief moment, she forgot about the strange phone call and the unsettling feeling that had followed her back inside. But just as things seemed to settle down, there was a knock at the door. Laura frowned. No one else was expected to arrive. Tonight, everyone who was coming had already shown up hours ago. She excused herself from the group and walked toward the entrance, her footsteps muffled by the carpet. When she opened the door, her stomach dropped. Standing on her porch were 2 police officers, their faces serious and unreadable. Behind them, red and blue lights flashed silently in the evening darkness. "Good evening, ma'am," one of the officers said, his voice calm but firm. "We received a report about suspicious activity at this address. Can we come in?" Laura's mind raced. Suspicious activity? At a birthday party? She nodded slowly and stepped aside, holding the door open for them. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her tone steady. "But I assure you it's just a family gathering, my granddaughter's birthday." The officers exchanged a glance before stepping inside. One of them scanned the room, taking in the balloons, the half-eaten cake on the counter, and the kids sprawled across the floor with board game pieces scattered around them. It looked like any other ordinary celebration. Still, they didn't seem entirely convinced. Their eyes lingered on the adults sitting at the dining table chatting quietly over coffee. That's when Laura noticed something unusual. A flicker of recognition crossed one officer's face as he focused on a man sitting near the window. The man was Alex, an old colleague of Laura's from the FBI. He'd been placed on administrative leave recently due to some allegations against him. Details Laura didn't know much about because he hadn't shared them. All she knew was that Alex had always struck her as a good person, someone who cared deeply about doing the right thing. He'd stopped by earlier in the day, surprising her with a gift for Mia. Laura hadn't thought twice about inviting him to stay for the party. After all, he was practically part of the family, but apparently not everyone saw it that way. The officer whispered something into his radio, and within moments, more police cars pulled up outside. Reinforcements arrived quickly, flooding the house with uniformed figures. The atmosphere shifted instantly. What had once been a joyful, carefree evening turned tense and uncomfortable. Guests exchanged worried glances, unsure what was happening. The kids stopped playing and huddled together, their wide eyes reflecting confusion and fear. Laura stepped forward, her heart pounding. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. "This is just a birthday party. There's nothing suspicious here." One of the officers hesitated before responding. "Ma'am, we received a report that someone at this residence may pose a threat. We're here to investigate further." Laura clenched her fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "A threat? From whom? These are my friends and family." She gestured toward the group, her gaze landing briefly on Alex. He sat quietly, his expression unreadable. If he was surprised or upset, he didn't show it. Instead, he simply stood up and raised his hand slightly, signaling cooperation. "I'll go with them," Alex said softly, addressing Laura. "It's okay. Let's get this sorted out." Before she could protest, he was escorted outside, leaving behind a cloud of unease. Laura watched helplessly as the officers led him to a waiting car. Mia tugged at her sleeve, tears welling up in her eyes. "Why are they taking him away, Grandma?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Did we do something wrong?" Laura knelt down and pulled her close, hugging her tightly. "No, sweetheart," she murmured, forcing herself to sound reassuring. "We didn't do anything wrong. This is just a misunderstanding. I promise. Everything will be okay." As the police cars drove off, the remaining guests began to pack up, sensing that the party was over. Laura thanked them for coming, though her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that this whole situation was connected to that phone call, the one from the neighbor who complained about the noise. Something about it didn't add up. And if there was one thing Laura hated, it was unanswered questions. Determined to find out what had really happened, she made a decision. Tomorrow, she would dig deeper. She would uncover the truth, not just for Alex's sake, but for Mia's too. Because no matter how complicated life got, Laura knew one thing for certain. Protecting her family came first. The next morning, Laura woke up with a heavy heart. The house was quiet now, the remnants of the party still scattered around, a few deflated balloons here, an empty soda can there. It felt strange to see her home so still after the chaos of the night before. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat by the kitchen window staring out at the neighborhood. Everything looked normal from this angle. Kids riding bikes, dogs being walked, neighbors tending to their gardens. But beneath the surface, something didn't feel right. Her mind kept circling back to the neighbor who had called the police. Who were they really? What had made them think a birthday party was suspicious enough to warrant such a drastic response? Laura knew she couldn't ignore the connection between that phone call and what happened later. Something about it seemed off, too convenient, almost calculated. And then there was Alex. Why would someone single him out like that? Was it because of the allegations against him? Or was there more to the story? Determined to get answers, Laura decided to start with the basics. She grabbed her laptop and began reviewing the security footage from the cameras installed around her property. Like many people in her line of work, She valued safety and always kept an eye on things. As she scrolled through the recordings from the previous day, one clip caught her attention. It showed the neighbor standing near their fence watching the party intently. They weren't just glancing over casually. They were lingering, almost studying the scene. At one point, they even pulled out their phone and snapped photos. Laura leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. This wasn't the behavior of someone annoyed by noise. This was something else entirely. She zoomed in on the video, trying to make out any details that might give her a clue about their intentions. That's when she noticed something odd. The neighbor wasn't alone. There was another person with them, partially hidden behind the fence. Whoever it was appeared to be pointing toward Laura's house, gesturing animatedly. It was hard to tell exactly what was happening, but it looked like they were having a heated discussion. Feeling a mix of curiosity and unease, Laura decided to dig deeper. She left the house and walked down the street, heading straight for the neighbor's place. When she reached their front door, she hesitated for a moment before knocking firmly. A few seconds passed before the door opened, revealing the same man who had called the police the night before. He looked surprised to see her and maybe a little guilty. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped and defensive. Laura took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "I wanted to talk to you about last night," she said evenly. "You called the police on my family during my granddaughter's birthday party. I'd like to understand why." The man shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "Look, I already told them everything. You folks were making a lot of noise and I thought it was late. I didn't mean for all that to happen." He gestured vaguely toward the direction of her house. Laura studied him carefully, searching for signs of dishonesty. "That's not the whole story, is it?" She pressed gently. "You mentioned suspicious activity to the officers. What did you mean by that?" He hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her question. Finally, he sighed and stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. Reluctantly, Laura followed him into the living room. The space was cluttered with newspapers and knickknacks, giving it a lived-in but slightly chaotic vibe. He gestured for her to sit, though he remained standing, pacing nervously. "I don't know what you want me to say," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I saw some people at your house I didn't recognize. One of them, I think I've seen his picture in the news or something. Something about trouble with the law. I figured I should report it just in case." Laura nodded slowly, piecing together what he was saying. So that was it. The neighbor had jumped to conclusions based on a vague memory of Alex's face in the media. But there was still something missing. A reason why they had gone to such lengths to escalate the situation. She decided to push a little harder. "And the photos you took?" she asked casually. "What were those for?" His eyes widened slightly, betraying his surprise. "Photos? What are you talking about?" Laura smiled faintly, letting him know she wasn't bluffing. "My security cameras caught you taking pictures of my house yesterday. Care to explain?" For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then, sighing again, he slumped into a chair across from her. "Okay, fine," he admitted reluctantly. "I may have gotten carried away. I've had issues with neighbors before. They play loud music, throw big parties, leave trash everywhere. I guess I let my frustration get the better of me. When I saw that guy at your house, I thought it was my chance to finally put a stop to it." Laura listened carefully, absorbing every word. While part of her understood where he was coming from, living next to noisy neighbors could be frustrating, she couldn't condone the way he'd handled things. His actions had turned a harmless celebration into a stressful ordeal for her family. Still, she knew anger wouldn't solve anything. If anything, it would only create more tension. "You realize how serious this is, right?" she said softly. "Calling the police like that, it doesn't just affect me. It affects everyone involved. My granddaughter was scared last night. Is that really what you wanted?" The neighbor looked down at his hands, guilt written all over his face. "No," he mumbled. "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. I guess I acted without thinking." Laura nodded, satisfied that he understood the weight of his actions. Let's figure out a way to move forward, she suggested. Maybe we can agree to communicate better in the future instead of jumping to extremes, deal? He hesitated for a moment before nodding. Deal. As Laura left his house, she felt a small sense of relief. At least now she knew the truth, or most of it anyway. But the bigger issue remained, clearing Alex's name. And for that, she would need to dig even deeper. After leaving the neighbor's house, Laura felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. On one hand, she was relieved to have some clarity about what had happened. The neighbor hadn't meant for things to spiral out of control. He was just frustrated and impulsive. But on the other hand, his actions had caused real damage. Alex was now caught in the middle of something he didn't deserve, and Mia's birthday celebration had been turned upside down. Laura knew that understanding the why behind it all wasn't enough. She needed to fix this, for her family, for Alex, and for herself. Back at home, she sat down at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee. Her mind raced as she thought through the next steps. If she wanted to clear Alex's name, she'd need evidence. Something concrete to prove that the allegations against him were either exaggerated or completely baseless. And if there was one thing Laura excelled at, it was gathering information. Years of working in law enforcement had taught her how to piece together puzzles, no matter how complicated they seemed. This situation might feel personal, but she couldn't let emotions cloud her judgment. It was time to approach this like any other case. Her first move was to talk to the people who had attended the party. They weren't just guests, they were witnesses. Someone might have noticed something unusual, even if they didn't realize it at the time. Laura started by calling the adults who had stayed late into the evening. One by one, she asked them casual questions. Did anything stand out during the party? Was anyone acting strangely? Had they seen or heard anything that could help explain why the police showed up? Most of the responses were vague, just polite reassurances that everything seemed fine. But then she spoke to an older woman who had brought her grandson to the party. The woman hesitated before speaking, as if unsure whether what she had to say mattered. Well, she began slowly, there was a car parked across the street for most of the afternoon. I remember noticing it because it stayed there for hours, without moving. At one point I saw someone get out and take pictures of your house. Laura's ears perked up. Pictures? She repeated, leaning forward. Are you sure? The woman nodded. Yes, I'm pretty sure. I thought it was odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Do you think it's connected to what happened last night? I'm not sure yet, Laura replied, keeping her tone calm. But thank you for telling me. It helps. Hanging up the phone, Laura felt a spark of determination. That car, and whoever was inside it, wasn't part of the neighbor's story. This wasn't just about noise complaints or misunderstandings anymore. Someone else had been watching her house, and that changed everything. Whoever it was could have played a role in tipping off the authorities, or worse, framing Alex. She needed to find out more. Later that day, Laura decided to pay a visit to the local police station. She wasn't going as an FBI agent. She was going as a concerned citizen. Walking into the building, she felt a strange sense of déjà vu. She'd spent countless hours in places like this throughout her career, but being on the receiving end of an investigation was new territory. Still, she held her head high and approached the front desk. I'd like to speak with the officer who responded to my address last night, she said firmly. It's important. The receptionist glanced at her skeptically, but eventually directed her to a small office where Officer Ramirez, one of the men who had come to her door, was sitting. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral. Ma'am, he greeted her. What can I do for you? Laura took a seat across from him, folding her hands on the table. I want to understand exactly what led to the decision to investigate my home last night, she explained. From what I've gathered, the report came from a neighbor who claimed there was suspicious activity. But I'm starting to suspect there's more to the story. Officer Ramirez hesitated, glancing at his notes. To be honest, we received additional information beyond the initial complaint, he admitted. Someone flagged your guest list, specifically mentioning a former colleague of yours who has been under scrutiny recently. Given the circumstances, We felt it was necessary to check it out. Laura frowned. Who provided that additional information? She asked, her voice steady but firm. The officer shifted uncomfortably. That's confidential, ma'am. All I can tell you is that it came from an anonymous tip. Anonymous tip. Those two words hit Laura like a punch to the gut. Anonymous tips were tricky. They could come from anywhere, and they often lacked accountability. In this case, it sounded less like helpful information and more like someone deliberately stirring the pot. Whoever had made the call clearly knew enough about Alex's situation to exploit it. And that raised a troubling question. Who would benefit from making Alex look guilty? Leaving the station, Laura's mind was racing. She realized she was dealing with more than just a nosy neighbor. There was a larger game being played here, and she needed to figure out who was pulling the strings. As she drove home, she replayed every detail in her head. The car across the street, the photos taken by the neighbor, the anonymous tip. Each piece of the puzzle pointed toward one conclusion. Someone was targeting Alex. And if she didn't act fast, the fallout could ruin his life, and maybe hers too, maybe hers. By the time Laura pulled into her driveway, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon again. The golden light bathed her neighborhood in a warm glow, but she barely noticed. Her mind was consumed with questions that seemed to multiply faster than answers. Who had planted that anonymous tip? Why were they targeting Alex? And most importantly, how could she prove his innocence when so much of the evidence felt stacked against him? She stepped inside her house where Mia was curled up on the couch watching cartoons. For a moment, Laura paused to watch her granddaughter's face light up at the screen. Despite everything that had happened, Mia still managed to find joy in the little things. It reminded Laura why she was doing all of this, not just for justice, but for the people she loved. She couldn't let someone else's agenda tear her family apart. Determined to stay focused, Laura grabbed her laptop and sat down at the kitchen table. If there was one thing she knew about investigations, it was that details mattered. Even the smallest clue could lead to a breakthrough. She opened a blank document and started jotting down everything she knew so far. A neighbor complained about noise and claimed suspicious activity. Someone took photos of her house during the party. An anonymous tip flagged Alex as a potential threat. A car had been parked across the street for hours, possibly observing the house. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As she stared at the list, one detail stood out. The car. Whoever had been sitting in that vehicle might have seen something or done something that could help piece together what really happened. But tracking down a random car wasn't easy, especially without a license plate or description. Laura decided to retrace her steps. The next morning, she went door to door in her neighborhood, asking if anyone had noticed anything unusual recently. Most people shook their heads, saying they hadn't paid attention. But then she knocked on the door of an elderly couple who lived 2 houses down. They invited her in, offering her a cup of tea as they chatted. "We did see a car parked across from your place last week," the husband said thoughtfully. "It stayed there for hours. My wife even joked that it looked like someone was spying on you." "Did you happen to catch the make or model?" Laura asked, trying to keep her tone casual. The wife squinted, thinking hard. "I'm not great with cars, but it was dark-colored, maybe black or navy blue. And there was a sticker on the back window, a logo of some kind." Her husband chimed in. "Oh yes, it looked like a camera lens. You know, the kind photographers use." Laura's pulse quickened. A photography-related sticker? That could mean the person inside the car was documenting something, or someone. She thanked the couple profusely and headed home, her mind spinning with possibilities. If the car belonged to someone involved in surveillance, it might be connected to whoever made the anonymous tip, but how could she track it down? That evening, Laura decided to take matters into her own hands. She parked her car a few streets away from her house and walked back under the cover of darkness. Using binoculars, she scanned the area, looking for anything out of the ordinary. At first, everything seemed quiet, too quiet. Then, just as she was about to give up, she spotted it. A dark sedan was idling near the corner, its engine running softly. Through the windshield, she could make out the faint outline of a figure inside. Her heart raced. Was this the same car the neighbors had described? She crouched behind a tree, careful not to draw attention. After a few minutes, the car slowly pulled away, disappearing into the night. Though she didn't get a clear look at the driver, she memorized the license plate number. Finally, she had something tangible to work with. Back at home, Laura ran the plate through a database accessible to law enforcement officials. To her surprise, the car was registered to a private investigation firm based in the city. Private investigators. What would they want with her family or with Alex? The more she uncovered, the murkier the situation became. Feeling a mix of frustration and determination, Laura picked up the phone and dialed Alex's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious but warm. "Hey," he said. "How are things?" "I need your help," Laura replied bluntly. "Someone's been watching my house and I think it's tied to what happened at the party. Do you know anyone who might have hired a PI to dig into your past?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Not that I'm aware of," Alex admitted, "but I've made enemies over the years. People who don't like being investigated, often hold grudges. Could be anyone." Laura sighed. Enemies. Of course. Working in law enforcement meant stepping on toes, and Alex had spent decades doing just that. Still, this felt personal, too targeted to be random retaliation. She promised to keep digging and hung up, feeling more determined than ever. As she sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the notes spread across the table, Laura realized something important. This wasn't just about clearing Alex's name anymore. It was about protecting her family from whoever was pulling these strings, and she wouldn't stop until she found them. The next morning, Laura woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but they still didn't form a complete picture. She knew she was on to something big, something that went beyond a nosy neighbor or an overzealous complaint. This was about someone deliberately trying to disrupt her life and ruin Alex's reputation. And if there was one thing Laura couldn't stand, it was people playing games with innocent lives. Her first step was to dig deeper into the private investigation firm linked to the mysterious car. Using her connections in law enforcement, she reached out to a trusted colleague who specialized in corporate surveillance cases. Over coffee at a quiet cafe, she explained the situation as carefully as possible, without revealing too many personal details. "I need to know who hired them," she said, stirring sugar into her cup. "If we can trace their client, we might finally understand what's going on." Her colleague nodded thoughtfully. "It won't be easy," he warned. "These firms are careful about keeping their clients anonymous. But I'll see what I can do." While waiting for him to gather information, Laura turned her attention back to Alex. He had been placed on administrative leave because of allegations involving misconduct during a high-profile case. At the time, Laura hadn't paid much attention to the specifics. Work politics weren't her priority when she was focused on raising Mia. Now, though, she realized those allegations could be key to understanding why someone wanted to frame him. She called Alex again, this time asking more pointed questions. "Tell me everything you remember about the case that led to your suspension," she said firmly. "No matter how small it seems, I need to hear it." Alex hesitated before speaking. His voice was low, almost hesitant, as if reliving memories he'd rather forget. "It was a drug trafficking ring," he began. "We spent months gathering evidence, building a solid case against the leaders. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until one of our key witnesses disappeared. Rumors started spreading that I'd tampered with evidence to protect someone. I don't even know who. The brass decided to suspend me while they investigated further." Laura listened intently, piecing together the timeline in her head. A missing witness, tampered evidence, suspicious rumors. It all sounded too convenient, like someone had orchestrated the entire mess to cast doubt on Alex's integrity. But who? And why now? As she mulled over the conversation, her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague. He had found something, a partial trail leading back to the person who had hired the private investigators. According to his sources, the firm had been working for a company tied to international trade logistics. On the surface, it seemed legitimate enough, but digging deeper revealed a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. Whoever was behind this wasn't just wealthy, they were powerful. Laura's stomach tightened. This wasn't some petty grudge match anymore. She was dealing with someone who had resources, connections, and likely no qualms about crossing lines to get what they wanted. For a moment, fear crept in. What if she couldn't stop them? What if they came after her family next? But fear wasn't an option, not when so much was at stake. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself why she was doing this. Mia deserved a safe, happy childhood. Alex deserved justice, and she deserved answers. With that resolve burning inside her, she made a plan. Later that evening, Laura sat down with Mia, who had been unusually quiet since the party. The little girl was coloring at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration. Laura watched her for a moment before sitting beside her. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" Mia shrugged, not looking up from her drawing. "I miss Alex," she admitted. "Is he okay?" Laura smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Mia's face. "He's fine, honey. We're working on making sure everything gets sorted out so he can come back soon." Mia nodded slowly, her crayon pausing mid-stroke. "Do you think the bad guys will go away?" Laura froze for a split second. Bad guys? Where had she heard that term? Then it hit her. The kids must have overheard bits of adult conversations during the chaos of the police visit. Guilt washed over her. She hadn't meant to let any of this affect Mia, but clearly it already had. The bad guys always lose in the end, Laura said firmly, pulling Mia into a hug, and we're going to make sure of that. That night, as Mia drifted off to sleep, Laura stayed awake, poring over documents and notes. She knew she couldn't take on this fight alone, not entirely. Reaching out to another trusted friend, in the FBI, she shared what she had uncovered so far. Together, they devised a strategy to confront the people behind the conspiracy head-on. By dawn, Laura had a clear path forward. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be quick, but she was ready. Ready to uncover the truth, protect her family, and bring justice to those who thought they could hide in the shadows. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through her window, she whispered a silent promise to herself and to Mia. No matter what it took, she would win this fight. The days that followed were a blur of activity for Laura. She barely slept, spending her nights combing through files and her days chasing leads. Each new discovery brought her closer to the truth, but also deepened the mystery surrounding the conspiracy against Alex. The more she uncovered, the more it became clear that this wasn't just about one person. It was about power, greed, and secrets buried so deep they threatened to destroy anyone who got too close. One afternoon, while reviewing financial records tied to the shell companies, linked to the private investigation firm, Laura stumbled upon something startling. Several transactions matched dates and amounts related to payouts in Alex's old drug trafficking case. At first glance, it seemed like loose ends being tied up, money changing hands to ensure silence. But as she dug deeper, she realized these payments weren't random. They traced back to a single account registered under an alias: Phoenix Holdings. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. Phoenix Holdings had surfaced during her early years in the FBI, though only in whispers. It was rumored to be a front for organized crime, a network that operated in the shadows, pulling strings across industries and governments. If they were involved now, it meant Alex's suspension wasn't just a personal attack. It was part of a larger plan to cover up something far bigger than either of them had imagined. Determined to confront this head-on, Laura reached out to her trusted friend in the FBI again. Together, they pieced together a timeline connecting Alex's case to recent activities by Phoenix Holdings. What emerged was a chilling pattern. Every time someone got too close to exposing their operations, careers were ruined, reputations smeared, and lives shattered. Alex wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last unless someone stopped them. Armed with evidence, Laura knew she needed to act fast. But taking on an organization like Phoenix Holdings wasn't something she could do alone. Even within the FBI, there were risks. Corrupt officials and compromised systems meant she couldn't trust everyone around her. So she decided to take matters into her own hands, but not without backup. She called Alex, asking him to meet her at a secluded park on the outskirts of town. When he arrived, looking weary but hopeful, Laura wasted no time getting straight to the point. "I know who's behind this," she said, handing him a folder filled with documents and photos. "And I need your help to bring them down." Alex flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "This is worse than I thought," he muttered, shaking his head. "If we go after them, they'll come after us hard." "I know," Laura replied firmly, "but we don't have a choice. They've already hurt Mia, disrupted our lives, and tried to destroy yours. We can't let them win." For a long moment, Alex didn't say anything. Then, finally, he nodded. "What's the plan?" Over the next few days, Laura and Alex worked tirelessly, gathering allies and building a strategy. They enlisted the help of a journalist known for exposing corruption, a woman whose integrity had earned her enemies but also respect. She agreed to publish their findings once they had enough proof to hold up in court. Meanwhile, Laura coordinated with select members of the FBI who shared her commitment to justice, ensuring they had legal backing when the time came. But as preparations intensified, so did the danger. Late one night, Laura heard the faint sound of footsteps outside her house. Peering through the curtains, she spotted a shadowy figure lingering near her mailbox. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. Grabbing her phone, she snapped a photo before retreating to a safe spot inside. Whoever it was hadn't expected her to notice, but they were sending a message: back off or else. Instead of letting fear paralyze her, Laura used it as fuel. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was her determination. She installed additional security cameras around her property, taught Mia what to do in case of an emergency, and kept a loaded handgun locked away in her bedroom closet. Safety came first, not just for her, but for everyone involved. Finally, the day arrived when they were ready to strike. With mounting evidence, insider testimonies, and media coverage lined up, Laura and her team prepared to expose Phoenix Holdings. As they gathered in a secure location to finalize their plans, Laura looked around the room at the faces of those who had joined her fight. There was fear in their eyes, but also resolve. "This isn't just about clearing Alex's name," she said, her voice steady yet passionate. "It's about standing up to people who think they're untouchable. For Mia, for justice, for all of us." No one spoke, but the weight of her words hung in the air. Tomorrow they would step into the lion's den, and there was no turning back. The morning of the big reveal came with a heaviness in the air, like the calm before a storm. Laura woke up earlier than usual, her mind racing despite the exhaustion that clung to her bones. She glanced at Mia, still asleep in her bed, and felt a pang of guilt mixed with resolve. This fight wasn't just for justice. It was for Mia's future, for the kind of world she deserved to grow up in. Taking a deep breath, Laura got dressed, checked her phone one last time for updates from the team, and headed out. The plan was simple but risky: release the evidence they had gathered to both law enforcement and the press simultaneously. By doing so, they hoped to create a public outcry strong enough to force action against Phoenix Holdings while protecting themselves from retaliation. The journalist they'd partnered with had promised to publish the story within hours of receiving the final documents. Meanwhile, trusted FBI agents would present the case internally, ensuring there was no room for cover-ups or delays. Laura met Alex and the rest of their small group at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. It was neutral ground, far enough from prying eyes but close enough to act quickly if needed. As they sat around a corner table, sipping coffee and reviewing the timeline one last time, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew what was at stake, not just their careers, but their lives. "We're ready," Laura said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt. "Let's do this." With that, they split up. Laura drove to the FBI field office, carrying a USB drive loaded with incriminating files. Every mile felt longer than the last, her grip tightening on the steering wheel as scenarios played out in her head. What if someone intercepted the information? What if Phoenix Holdings already knew about their plans? She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the faces of those who had stood by her. Alex, the journalist, Mia. Failure wasn't an option. At the office, Laura handed over the USB drive to her most trusted contact, a senior agent named Dan. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and disappeared into a secure briefing room. While she waited anxiously in the hallway, her phone buzzed with a text from the journalist. Story goes live in 15 minutes. Minutes later, the first headlines began popping up online. Major news outlets picked up the story almost instantly, exposing Phoenix Holdings' ties to corruption, illegal activities, and attempts to silence anyone who dared challenge them. Social media erupted with outrage as people shared screenshots of financial records, photos of shadowy figures linked to the organization, and testimonies from whistleblowers too scared to speak out until now. Back at the cafe, Alex watched the chaos unfold on his laptop screen, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's working," he murmured, glancing at the others seated nearby. "They're actually doing it." But the victory was short-lived. Within hours, Phoenix Holdings struck back. Anonymous threats flooded social media, targeting not just Laura and Alex, but everyone involved in the investigation. Their names were dragged through the mud, accused of fabricating evidence and seeking revenge for personal grudges. Even Mia became collateral damage as cruel comments appeared under old family photos posted online. Laura refused to let fear dictate her next move. She called a press conference, standing alongside Alex and the journalist in front of cameras and microphones. With Mia safely tucked away at a friend's house, she faced the crowd, her expression unyielding. "This isn't about us," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "It's about holding powerful people accountable, about showing the world that no one is above the law. Yes, they'll try to intimidate us, they'll try to discredit us, but we won't back down. Because behind every lie, behind every threat, there's truth, and that truth will set us free." Her words resonated, sparking even more support from the public. Calls poured into government offices demanding action, and protests erupted outside corporate headquarters tied to Phoenix Holdings. For the first time, the organization's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Weeks turned into months as investigations unfolded. Charges were filed, arrests made, and assets seized. Though Phoenix Holdings fought tooth and nail to protect its empire, the tide had shifted. People believed in the cause, and in Laura's unwavering determination to see it through. In the end, Alex was cleared of all allegations, his reputation restored. The neighbor who had started it all apologized profusely, admitting he'd been manipulated into making the initial complaint. And Laura? She returned to her life, grateful for the peace that had finally settled over her home. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching Mia play in the yard, Laura smiled. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she knew one thing for certain. Together, they could face anything.